Hey, Shane.
Stanislav.
What's up, S-Baby?
I see you're opening like 7 copies of full art Flame of Anor.
Yeah, there was a brief period where I technically bought out UK card market of the full art Flames of Anor. I don't know if that's still the case.
Flame of Anors, you mean?
Yeah, Flames of Anors.
Anor's, I call them Anor's Flames.
I both want to play them, but it would be nice to make a cheeky profit. Am I right?
A whole 4 or 5 pounds could be made by doing that, I think.
How many LBs?
It's GPPs, and you know that.
Can I tell you, by the way, that I opened 2 boxes of Lord of the Rings, okay? And every time I go look for Lorien Revealed, Flame of Anor, Sorin's Ransom, to get a single of any of those cards, I got 2 Lorien Revealed in 2 boxes.
How many like random hobbits did you open?
So many random hobbits. I did get 3 Bowmasters and a ring out of my boxes at least, so I got some of the cards that I wanted. But it was still
the highest value card in the set.
Yeah, but I was still like, what? All these secondary cards, I didn't get any of them that I want, and now I'm reduced to like building EDH decks to use my mithril coats and things like that.
I think anyone who makes any EDH deck is reduced to doing that.
Yeah. I am. I have Glamdring in my list just because it's one of the only other mythics I opened.
I opened a Glamdring too, and I was like, this actually looks like kind of an interesting card. It's all of $2. Mm-hmm. That's how it works, I guess. Sometimes it do be that way. Hello and welcome to episode 239 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Manchester, and with me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's a happy Labor Day to you, Shane Beeps.
My favorite holiday of the year, Labor Day. Happy Labor Day to you and yours.
Today Day is Labor Day.
Yes, Stanislav, how's my Flame of Anor's mogul doing today?
I'm having a great day. It's very warm in Manchester. We've got a bit of a heat wave going on in Europe, and this time it actually reached northern England. I'm sweating.
Oh, no. Well, I did see you sent a video about 10 minutes ago of you stridently striding through the alley.
That was
alley? The road?
That was a very normal road.
Looked like an alley.
I was going to say, that's just what streets look like in Europe, buddy. That's just what they look like.
We don't really have alleys that look like American alleys. We have, I think they're called bin alleys, and they're very, very narrow. 2 people could not stand side by side in a bin alley, and they're just wide enough for you to store your rubbish bins and for the councilman to come and collect your rubbish bins once a week.
And write tickets when you mess up your bins.
Basically, yeah, and fine you. Also with us, the Godfather, Dave Hardbarker.
Local bin expert.
That's how I always describe you.
The weirdest thing for me moving to the suburbs has been that the bins I have to take out to the curb every week. They're not just in my alley where the truck comes and gets them. And then I have to put stickers on things that are too big. When you're in the city of Chicago, you don't have to put stickers on anything. Out here, you got to like pay extra. You want to get rid of a filing cabinet? It's an extra $6. Put some stickers on it.
Before we get into this week's show, we should talk about our sponsor, Heavy Play, the card gaming accessories brand that's determined to improve your gameplay and your game day. Their playmats, their deck boxes, and their card sleeves feature ergonomic enhancements specifically for mobility and protection to go hand in hand. Gentlemen, I went to a Wilds of Eldraine pre-release on Friday night, and I brought my Equip Mag deck box to be my pre-release deck box, so I don't have to use that crappy cardboard trash that Wizards gives us with punch-out +1/+1 tokens that are worthless. So I used my my Heavy Play deck box and my Heavy Play playmat, and I kid you not, all of my opponents commented on how cool my playmat is when they saw me click it into place. People love it.
Yeah, I remember before it was officially out, I was using the beta test stuff at my LGS as well. And everyone was like, one person was like, yeah, I heard about it on your podcast. I've already pre-ordered it. Another person, and then two other people were like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And I'm like, yes, it is very cool because, you get to snap everything together. You get to carry everything in a single hand. You get to throw it in your bag really easily.
I even dove into the sleeves this weekend because as you know, I have an entire modern collection in a certain kind of sleeve already, but some people have convinced me, or maybe I convinced myself to actually make a commander deck. And so I sleeve my commander deck in the curved sleeves, the bottom curved sleeves, gave them a try. They feel really good. You know what? I felt so good about it. I put my secret Rule Zero card in heavy play sleeves as well, which is a Mox Ruby that I'm going to surprise my play group with. So I have Mox Ruby in there. I have a Wheel of Fortune in there. A couple of other kind of random expensive cards that I have. I just, I threw them in. I put them, you know why? Because I trust the boxes. The sleeves, I do trust as well, but I very much trust the boxes to take care of my stuff.
So if you want to check out Heavy Play stuff, you can go to heavyplay.com, look at all of the various product options that are there, and you can use code the Dive Down 2023 for 10% off of your first order there. It's also hopefully coming to your LGS soon. I know that we talked to Randy. He says that a good number of folks out there have been using the code. We truly appreciate that. And the more of you that do, the more likely we are to keep working with heavyplay.com. I will tell you what, there's stuff in the pipeline. I'm not going to tell you what that is, but Randy has shared some stuff with us, and I think you should watch that space. You should see what Randy's doing over at Heavy Play. It's looking cool.
All right, thanks for that, y'all. Let's talk about this week's show. We have a very exciting one because once again, we are doing a super special listener request episode from one of our top tier patrons, who also just so happens to be one of our most loyal sponsors. Yes, it's Will from Barrister and Man. Not only does he make amazing fragrance products, but he's also just a good old-fashioned top-tier patron who has earned the rare privilege of giving us, the Rhino Boys, an assignment. This week, Will asked us to do a deep dive history lesson into some of Magic's most important and infamous sets, so we wanted to make it about Modern because that is the heart of our show, and we're going to chat about some of the sets and cards that have defined this format at some of its most pivotal iterations, with a special focus on some of the sets that meant the most to us as players too. So it's going to be very cool, and we hope you stick around.
Yeah, it's funny to stand before you got on. Dave and I were chatting, and we're like, what is this episode about? Because we wrote a bunch of stuff, and we're like, well, how do we actually frame this episode? And the way I was thinking about it is it's basically, to me, the history of Modern that isn't about decks, that isn't about tournaments, that isn't about bans and unbans. It's about how the set came to us in its
Well, it's a little
form.
about bans and unbans. There's a couple snuck in there.
Sure.
I think it's a little bit about the sets that have defined us along the way.
Yes. And I think what's cool about this, we'll talk about this obviously in the actual episode, but it was really cool to look at the development of the format and how we got to where we are today by really taking a really close look at these old, important, and impactful sets, both in terms of how people engaged with Magic, what they thought about, WotC and the developers. And I haven't taken I haven't turned my eye towards shards of Alara or something like that ever. And so to really be what was this about? What were the cards and ideas in this set was actually really cool.
I totally agree. And I wasn't even going to mention this, but I'm just going to pull the curtain back very briefly. I'm not sure if the two of you clocked this, but I was up very late last night. I was up writing notes till 2 a.m. Not because I had to, but because I was just having so much fun going through the old sets.
I could tell.
And seeing how they introduce all these different pieces to the format that have been very important at different stages of even my Modern career, which has really only lasted 7-8 years. I probably started playing Modern a couple of years before we started the pod. So yeah, this was just a fun one to make, and I'm grateful to Will for giving us the task.
Yeah, very cool. Let's get into that housekeeping really fast so we can actually get into this episode. We have a few new patrons. We have MTG Chicago and Matthew D. Thank you both for becoming citizens of the Dive Down Nation. We truly appreciate it. We couldn't make the show without the Patreon, so we appreciate all you citizens out there. We also have a new review this week.
This is a great one.
This is a really good review from Asia Nathan is the name on Apple Podcasts. I guess I just have to read this. I don't play Modern nor Pioneer, yet I listen to this podcast. The hosts are fine, but I'm not sure why I keep listening. That Devin guy is cool. Devin, we know this is your alt account. So
the headline on this is just not sure why.
Oh yeah, not sure why. But we got 5 stars.
Do you think this is potentially Nathan Fielder just leaving like the most awkward review ever?
I mean, I appreciate the 5 stars, and full disclosure, that's the review.
Kind words. I do want to hop in here 1 second.
Please.
2 things newsworthy. One is speaking of Devin won the Modern Challenge this week on Saturday. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Was it Saturday or was it Sunday? Saturday with Mono Black Coffers. I think the next time we have him on next week, we'll talk about it a little bit. I know it'll be a little bit later, but this episode is packed, so we're not going to talk about it a ton right now. But it was almost Devin versus Everett in the finals, which was pretty cool. So congratulations to Devin for that.
The dive down bump.
And congrats to Spike for almost making it. We'll talk about that in the future. Also, the Modern Super League started last week.
Oh, yeah.
And that was very sweet to watch. And I hope that you'll consider watching that. I don't have the link handy. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't even know what that is, it is basically pools of people playing Modern on Magic Online. And it's like, a pool-based thing. Then they're going to, go to a championship series where it goes to like the finals and stuff like that. I believe the people in the pools are providing commentary when they're not playing. So it's a really cool model. A lot of, folks that, like Everett, like Doom, like Canister, like Carmen Hardy or Carmen Complarence.
Young Dingo was on. Mason Clark was on last week, the first episode that we watched. Anyway, I only bring it up for 2 reasons. One is you should watch it. 2 is we are going to sponsor it. We're going to take one of their advertising slots to help them out. And so you might see our names on that. So please, tell your friends that we're there too. We wanted to help out as best we can. We imagine many of the people who watch this probably know about the podcast, but why not put our name in front of some people, but also just give them some money so they can hopefully keep running.
Yeah. So patreon.com/thedivedown helps you keep us going. We have our store over at thedivedown.com/store. We can get your swag. Like I said, it's getting a little bit chillier eventually. So go get yourself, I don't know, Stanislav calls them cheeky toques, I believe now. Some kind of beanie, stuff like that. You can support us on Mana Traders. We have a new Mana Traders code. New Mana Traders code alert. It is the Dive Down 23. The Dive Down 23, the same as our Barrister and Man code, that goes until the end of the year, thankfully, because it would be weird to have it as 23 in 2024. So you can get 10% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards over at Mana Traders using that. Barrister and Man, our grooming and fragrance and soaps partner. The Dive Down 23 is 15% off your first order.
That's right.
And NRG Plus, our friends over at NRG, just give our listeners 8% off their orders with Dive 8. So there we go. We're ready for this episode.
Okay, let's get into the meat of this banquet.
Yes, there's a lot to talk about. We have a lot of pages of notes. I'm curious how the pacing of this is going to go. But the way I thought about approaching this when I got into these notes first, which means I get to type whatever I want. And so what I typed about was basically, I thought we could do this in like a couple halves, really. And right, one is, what did we have at the beginning of Modern when it became a format? And then what was printed into Modern as the format progressed, as after 2011 or so, when the format became real, what kind of stuff kept coming into Modern and how did it impact our thoughts, feelings, what people were doing, stuff like that. What were the cool things that happened? So we kind of talked about what this episode is really going to be. a history of Modern through the sets and kind of just talking about our experiences with these sets and kind of the cards in them and things like that. So, brief history of Modern is that it was a Magic Online format in May 2011, official format August 2011, because WotC was like, yeah, this is going to be our PT format in Philadelphia in September. And so what that meant was that for that first Wild PT, the cards you had access to were from 8th edition through Magic 2012.
I was not playing Magic at this time.
Nor was I.
I was.
Okay. So I have a question about this Magic Online only version of Modern. I didn't even know that was a thing until we started making this episode. What was that transition like? What did you always know it was going to convert to paper?
No, I completely forgot about this part as well. I also through this episode, I think I've given several different dates for when I became a Modern. I have the definitive answer for that later on. I was very much just playing limited at this point in time. Still, I was kind of like a Magic Online limited draft grinder, and that was it. I do remember when this happened because some people were some people really liked Extended, which is the format that used to exist in this space. Some people really hated it. And what happened was I knew that they were testing it. There was a decent amount of buzz around it at the time. I paid a little bit of attention to Pro Tour, but not a huge amount because I didn't really know a lot of the cards, especially the ones, say, pre-Alara block or pre-Zendikar. So I was paying attention with one eye at this point in time, but I think there was a good amount of excitement around this. I don't think people knew for sure it was going to convert to paper, but they kind of felt like it was going to because people knew that engagement with Extended was low overall. And the problem with Extended was that it was a rotating format. So it had like an endpoint that changed over time. And what they decided to do was instead institute this other format that was more like Legacy in that it had a fixed beginning. Mm-hmm. And they felt like that was going to help people be able to do it more. But the interesting thing about it is that, at the beginning of Pioneer, it was kind of the same number of sets.
Yes.
Right? Shane, is what you determined was that at this time period in 2011, it was kind of like the same as when Pioneer started in set number.
Yeah, like if you want some context for like what Modern was like when it started, it's like basically the same number of sets, but they had fewer cards because they were still like the large small set approach to blocks. So a lot of the sets were like 150-ish cards as opposed to like, the 250 or whatever that we get right now. So Modern, here's some more context. Like Modern was so new that Zendikar, the printing of the enemy fetch lands, there were no allied ones. So there was only like 5 of the 10 fetches. So basically, instead of the 22 years of cards we have now, there was just a little over 8 when Modern was sort of solidified into its nascent format. And
remember the idea behind what Modern was and why it was called Modern and all that kind of thing. Do you guys remember?
Yes, I think I know this one. It was when they converted the old frame to the quote-unquote modern frame around 8th edition.
Correct. Yeah, so that's why it's called Modern, and that's also why they chose that endpoint, which sounds like weirdly arbitrary, but I think from an intuitiveness, I think that there's a case that can be made for this just because it's trying to help people sort in that way. Now, of course, Magic's visual presentation has changed a huge amount in the last 10 years, but that's why. And that's
I don't think when they converted the border in 8th edition, that was the plan. In fact, it's not listed in the notes, but I'm almost certain that I once saw an interview with Gavin Barhay, who apparently created Modern basically as an assignment from WotC and determined the format and just kind of, I think, happened to realize the elegance of using 8th edition as the starting point.
Yeah. And speaking of 8th edition, this is where I actually wanted to start because it seems like kind of an arbitrary thing to start with, but like you said, it was the birth of the modern card frames that are still used over 20 years later, sort of now and then, and
mostly.
And fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, depending on your point of view, right, the inclusion of 8th edition and the interesting way in which some of the cards actually got into the set in the first place has given modern players a surprising number of important cards that are still relevant to this day. Because so 8th edition was released as one of the, quote unquote core sets. And so it just had tons of reprints, as core sets used to do more often.
I just want to mention too, the year now, we started in 2011. The year is now 2003.
Yes.
When we go back to 8th edition. So we're going back to the beginning. It's 2003 when that set came out.
Thank you. And what WotC did in this set is they gave players a voice in what cards were included in the set through voting on their website. Remember, this is 2003. So this is kind of like, it's not the early days of the web by any means, but I think it's fairly novel for them to do this kind of concept on the web back in that day. And those choices even extended to like the art and the flavor text on some of the cards. So there were 12 different pair-ups that they gave people the ability to vote on. I'm not going to go through all of these, but some really interesting ones that that impact us now is instead of having Ensnaring Bridge, we could have had Static Orb. Instead of Birds of Paradise and Vine Trellis, for whatever reason, we could have had Llanowar Elves and Utopia Tree. Instead of having Blood Moon, we could have had Dwarven Miner. No, not Dwarven Mine, Dwarven Miner. So, we have players from over 20 years ago to thank for, so that we have, Bop, Blood Moon, and Ensnaring Bridge in Modern. So thank you folks back then.
Can you imagine how much different the modern format would be if we actually had Llanowar elves in it?
No. Would it be different? Instead of Birds of Paradise, elves would be slightly better. Oh, we have Llanowar elves now. Wait a minute.
We do have Llanowar elves in the format, by the way. So
it got reprinted. And of course, 8th edition also brought us other modern staples that entire decks have been built around, like the Tron lands, which they hadn't been printed since 5th edition, and they have never been printed into a standard set again since 9th, because they were printed in 8th and 9th. And along with Blood Moon, we had color hosers like Boil and Choke, which still randomly see sideboard play in particular metas. I'm sure have made people mad for decades, so overall a pretty good thing. I mean, honestly, I love the lameness of 8th edition. Like, I love the white card frames. I love the mostly boring reprints. I love the fact that people are still mad that folks voted Blood Moon into the set instead of Dwarven Miner. And, of course, the Tron lands have allowed one of the most hated mainstays of the format to keep existing for a long time. So I'm happy about 8th, even though it's super lame.
I mean, this is super typical of what the core sets used to be. And having had a store, even going back to like 5th edition, core sets never sold very well, and WotC has shared that story a lot. They were all reprints. They had no thematic cohesion. The cards that were in there were often sort of inexplicable and cards that people didn't really want. And like, it was always kind of a weird grab bag. And then the white border was the original thing that they wanted to do to make sure that you knew that it was an unlimited print run versus a limited print run. And it just aesthetically, they don't look as nice as the black borders. I know people kind of mess around with it now because now the hip thing is like they have white borders sometimes. But anyway, this was a super typical core set in that sense as well. I know that, we talked about the card frame a little bit. There was some player furor about that as well, of course, at the time, just because it changed the look and feel of Magic cards and people didn't like it and blah, 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 blah. There's a story that I don't know if it's apocryphal about Zvi Moskowitz walking out of a meeting because he worked at WotC at the time when they showed the graphics for the court frame, just walking out of the meeting. I don't know if that's apocryphal or not, but
that's wild.
Worth noting. This was the format, right? Like, this was the first foundation of the format. And yeah, it is kind of arbitrary, but there's important cards in here that matter to all of us.
I also kind of feel like if we look at 8th edition, it's a window into what happens when players get what they want, quite literally, since people voted on this. And I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that Magic and Modern, for that matter, has, our version of armchair quarterbacks. And, when the populace decides on inclusions, we seem to get a combination of either questionable choices that include cards that are maybe unfun or just like plain bad. And, it makes me wonder what would happen if the populace got to make these types of decisions for a modern core set. Like, how
man,
how ugly would it get?
Don't threaten WotC with a good time. They haven't done online polling in a minute. They might. They always might.
I was playing a little bit in this time. This is when I was first discovering Magic the Gathering. Tail end of Invasion is when I started, and then right around Mirrodin was when I stopped. And I remember 8th edition coming out. I remember a little bit of a fervor on the forums and in my junior high school about the new frame. I have no recollection of the voting methodology. Was everyone allowed to vote?
Yeah, it's just on a website. Yeah. So there's just some web-based thing. I found the archives of it, when I was looking, and just a primitive looking website by today's standards, and they just had people vote. All right, but we got to move on into hot on the heels of 8th edition, Mirrodin block, 2003 to 2004. Mirrodin, Darksteel, and 5th Dawn had this heavy artifact theme. Equipment was brought to Magic. It took us to Mirrodin for the first time. Also introduced Affinity, which will be super important to Modern over the years as well, and making people grumpy in constructed formats for many years. And also concepts like Sunburst, Scry, Indestructible, Modular. I didn't play then, but my understanding
completely
was Mirrodin
busted.
was super busted.
In fact, Affinity, my dad had the store at this time. I was in college, or I just finished college, I guess, actually. So I was just starting working. And I remember talking to him at the time, and he was like, yeah, this is the worst time we've ever had for Magic, because Standard is so bad that they need to ban a huge amount of cards. And they didn't have anybody coming out. And it was enough that I think this was one of the nails in our store actually closing. But it was one of the worst times in Magic Standard up to that point. So, and it also clearly forms a bunch of the currently banned cards from Modern. So people had so many bad vibes about Mirrodin that when they started Modern itself, they banned a bunch of these cards. And those include the Artifact lands, which had to be banned in Standard as well. It's my understanding. Chrome Mox, Cloud Post, Seething Song, Second Sunrise was banned later. Skull Clamp, Mycosynth Lattice was banned later, and more.
Yeah. And there's a lot of key cards here, Arcbond Ravager, Aether Vial, Chalice, Cranial Plating, KCI. Just a bunch of stuff was in this set. Sword of Fire and Ice, Engineered Explosives, Eternal Witness randomly. So yeah, this was a really important set that I didn't play, but I think it's one of the early sets that really was you have to be careful when you do these heavily thematic sets where there's a lot of synergy with the equipment, the artifacts, the affinity mechanic, things like that, and pushing mana ramp with Cloud Post and stuff like that. Wow, it's just, I can't even imagine design. This is early Fire design.
I've heard it said that some designers at the time lost their jobs over this set and its aftermath, and maybe that's schoolyard gossip, though I heard it at an LGS from a grown man.
Well, like I said, this was one of the moments where Magic felt the closest to just dying because they had messed up the power level so badly.
So when people were just upset that stuff was getting banned out from under them, or they were just this sucks to play because games are over really quickly and it snowballs, or
it's both at the same time. It's having to buy cards in order to have them be banned, in order to have unfun games that just kind of you miss a whole generation. I mean, think about how long people play Magic. There's a huge bunch of people who maybe only play for 2 or 3 years at a crack, right? And so if half of their time is this terrible environment, they're not going to stay. They're going to go do something else with their free time. And so, it was tenuous. It was bad.
And I think what's interesting about this is that, so many of the cards in this list are all artifacts, and I think it's kind of an early warning sign where it's hey, if you do a set that's heavily colorless and these cards can be played in whatever deck you really want them to be played in, then we see the impact of that now, where these are all of our sideboard cards in safety valves because they can go anywhere.
Oh, you don't say. A colorless payoff card that can go, a value engine that can go in a lot of different decks can be trouble. All right, let's move on from Mirrodin because we don't want to spend too long on any particular place. We're not going to talk about Kamigawa, just so people know. We're probably going to skip other sets, but just because this is the first one we're going to skip, we don't have much to say about Kamigawa as far as infamy goes.
It wasn't loved. I know that.
Get at us in the comments if you disagree.
Oh yeah.
But we're gonna go on to the next.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I forgot to mention that up front, which is look, this is not going to be encyclopedic. This is not going to include every set that you think is important. It's not going to include every card that you think is important, because that's really not what this is about. This is kind of like, hey, some highlights of stuff that maybe we played or we thought was cool, or seemed like it really was important for the development of the storyline of Magic, and that's really kind of how we approach this.
Yeah, still important now was one of my big filters, and that's one of the biggest things about Ravnica, which is 2005 to 2006. So Ravnica, the first city playing one of the first big thematic stories that was kind of on its own, I feel like. They tried it with Kamigawa. Mirrodin was connected to the main story, though. It was released in 2000. I'm double checking right now. 2005 is when Ravnica City of Guilds came out in October. People loved the theme, and it brought Magic back from a period of relative unpopularity that was headlined by Mirrodin and Kamigawa. Both, we kind of understand. We just talked about that. The thing that was interesting is that this is where they branded the two colored pairs for the first time. They gave them names. They decided to do this whole kind of like gold story around the whole set. There's lots of different things that had been gold cards before, but this is the first one where they try to give personalities to these two color pairs and just make that part of the story. But of course, as far as we go from like the Spike direction, the biggest thing, most important thing about this set block is that this is where they figured out a good dual land, probably for the first time in a long time. A good playable dual land that was reasonably balanced because of the downside of taking the 2 damage, allowing you to have it come into play tapped. And those are the shock lands, and those are still super important to Modern. They're still a key part of the mana base. They've been reprinted many times here, but this is key, and also the fact that it could be fetched in deeper formats, going back to, for people who were playing with Odyssey cards, like in Legacy and stuff like that, or what was extended at the time. That was an important factor in it as well.
Are these the best design lands that they've ever done?
When I think about it now, I kind of think they are, right? Because if you look at Pioneer, the fact that Pioneer has these as a key part of it, and they don't really dominate the format the same way that fetch lands dominate Modern. They're in Pioneer. They lead people to be able to play a certain number of combinations. You can play more than 2 colors sometimes, but you have to really be thoughtful about it. Mostly they enable really good 2-color decks. Like, I think that was what they wanted with these, and that's what they are.
I mean, I love the fact that they are typed, so you can do the things that you can do with typed enablers,
right?
Type of thing. Like even our land cyclers in the latest Lord of the Rings set. I love the fact that they give players a choice whether or not they take the damage or not, and unlike other duels that maybe just sort of have timing restrictions where it's like, yeah, if they're in early, then they're untapped. If they're in late, then they're untapped. And I think it gives people that agency to really kind of make the decision that they need to. And yeah, they with fetches, they're kind of a lot, but I think they're just my favorite lands.
They certainly weren't the only cards from this set that impacted Modern or helped define it over the years.
So many.
This is the set that gave us basically the foundation of Dredge, Life of the Loam, GGT, which has come and gone a couple times. Stinkweed Imp, Dark Blast, Golgari Thug. Dark Confidant was first printed in this set. Lightning Helix, Court of Calling, Leyline of the Void, Spell Snare, Protean Hulk, Utopia Sprawl, Glimpse the Unthinkable, just to name a few.
Yeah, so many interesting cards. I mean, this set's just so important, I think, to so many people because of, I think it just gave people, like you mentioned, Dave, it gave people like this idea of what these colors were supposed to do. Even if it wasn't, that already kind of was built into the color design, but I think like putting it so explicitly, giving people these lanes for draft and deck construction and stuff like that, I think it's really important to give people guides and rails and things like that sometimes. And I think it really encourages newer players to adopt something where it's like, oh, this isn't that complicated. I can just get a black-red deck and I have something going on.
We also see a little bit of standard then evolving into Modern. If we look at all these Dredge cards, for instance, like this could have been an archetype that players were drafting. It was an archetype that they were probably playing in Constructed, and then once it became Modern, or the format emerged, and they were able to pad it with other good on-plan cards, like that probably felt really good for people who held on to all of their old Ravnica chaff.
Yeah. And what's wild too is I think that's an interesting example, Stan, because Dredge was not designed to do what Dredge did in the end. Like the Dredge deck that came out of Dredge was like not kind of the original conception of what the mechanic was even designed to do. I'm trying to remember like what Rosewater said like their concept for Dredge was, but it's interesting to see like, yeah, once you take this standard mechanic and you expand it into a much larger card set, what people can do with it. And I think that that's kind of like one of the earliest examples I can think of there, because Ravnica was fairly early on.
But what about what was after Ravnica? Because this is where things get kind of wild.
Was this right after Ravnica?
So, yeah, the thing that was in between Ravnica and Time Spiral block was Cold Snap, which is one of the wildest marketing campaigns where they said, hey, we forgot we made this set.
Yes.
Which is so just funny. Not true. But okay.
So, yeah, Cold Snap was the second Ice Age set, right?
It was really the third one because Alliances was part of Ice Age as well. But anyway, this was just marketing, and Cold Snap, of course, has its cards in it, but we're gonna skip that for now, for today.
Yeah.
And move on to Time Spiral block.
Let me gush about Time Spiral.
Yeah.
Because this is one of the first times I've closely looked at the Time Spiral, Planar Chaos, and Future Sight block. And I think that the execution of this set, the concept and execution, was perhaps one of WotC's most clever ideas. So, conceptually, Teferi returns to Dominaria, finds it devastated and barren. Time is fracturing, like people, locations, objects from the past are appearing and disappearing. And so to turn this concept into a physical reality, for Time Spiral, there were not only 301 all-new cards, big old set, they had 121 time-shifted cards, which were entirely pre-Mirrodin reprints, but then legal in any set that uses Time Spiral cards. So they were just like, hey, here's 121 cards from before Mirrodin, so essentially before Modern, in this case. I guess there could be 8th edition and stuff like that. And they're just, here they're brought into the set. They're legal in anything that uses Time Spiral. So Time Spiral did stuff like giving us Suspend, tons of cards that we're still using in busted ways today. There's Planar Chaos continued this concept with these alternate reality cards, like shifting the color identity of classic cards, like Wrath of God becomes a Damnation. Force Spike becomes Mana Tithe. Elvish Spirit Guide becomes Simian Spirit Guide.
Braids becomes a younger blue Braids.
Perfect.
I will say really quick, before we get off the time-shifted cards and completely away from those, the color shifts are one thing. The time-shifted cards, there's not a lot of absolute bangers on this list. I'm looking through it right now just to double-check, and there's a few things that get played occasionally. But the biggest thing to me is I'm pretty sure this is the first time they did a bonus sheet set. And that was something that has clearly become a major part of the way that WotC thinks about putting together sets right now from a marketing perspective. We've got the enchantment bonus sheet in WoW right now, for example, and they're doing that more and more often. But I'm pretty sure this was the first time they did this kind of also ran sheet that's kind of fun stuff in booster packs to make them more fun and nostalgic to open. In a way, the time shifted bonus sheet has turned into the list, if you think about it from that perspective.
And then the final set in the block, Future Sight, it continues this wild block with these future shifted cards that they hadn't been printed before, but may appear in a future set. So yeah, they're here, but they may be reprinted later. And so this is where we get something like Tarmogoyf, and it featured reminder text of a card that no one even had heard of before when this card was released, when it referenced Planeswalkers.
Yeah.
So just imagine that happening now, where it's just dungeons, and then you're like, what's a dungeon?
Well, we did have that happen now.
Yeah, that happened, right?
Yeah, because Atraxa referenced battles in that particular set, but that only came a few months later. Lorwyn still is basically a year after. Well, it's not a year after Future Sight. It's 4 months after Future Sight, 5 months after Future Sight's when Lorwyn comes out.
Yeah, so same concept. They kind of redid it.
Yep, they kind of redid it. I will say, this set is infamous There's a huge list of playables here. Like, it's gigantic. The number.
I think
of
it's like
cards that are
30
in
at
here.
least.
Living End is in this set, and Chromatic Star is in this set, and Narcomoeba is in this set. Grape Shot, Rift Bolt, they're in this set. Bridge from Below, Street Wraith,
Angel's Grace,
Tarmogoyf, of course, is on this set. So we've talked about a lot of the cards. Simian Spirit Guide, the now banned Simian Spirit Guide, is on this list as well. This set is infamous, though, from another point of view, which is that this is yet another perhaps design fail on the commercialization of Magic side, and has been sort of infamous in a set that got way too complex for non-completely enfranchised players to engage with it fully, because the theme of it was super meta, right? The art direction theming of it was very, very meta. It was about stuff going on in the outside of the universe and playing with the tropes within Magic that mostly only enfranchised players would know about. And this led to a whole bunch of different decisions that happened later on, which have come kind of under this idea of what was at the time called New World Order, where they decided we have to make Magic simpler. And that culminates a couple of sets after this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just a supremely creative idea, and they didn't know necessarily how to rein it in. Like, it seems like you can do whatever you want. Like, designers and developers, like, let's just go ham. Let's make this creative idea into a reality. And then everyone's like, we can't handle like 30 different keywords in our standard set, please. This is a little bit wild.
I think players would feel differently now, though. When we look at something like the original Dungeons and Dragons set, where every card had its own unique keyword that were just allusions to D&D, and I think people loved that at the time.
Yeah.
And I wonder what that says about like the player base's evolution. How much of that is players are becoming more sophisticated as they enter Magic, or have they become more sophisticated as the game has evolved?
Well, can I tell you one thing that I think fits with what you're talking about, actually, is so one of the things that I remember being kind of problematic with cards from this era, again, I didn't play, this was right before I came back. One of the things was they moved away from onboard tricks, having too many things that were on the board that players had to track in a game state, and moved to comes into play abilities is part of what happened with this. And I think that when you look at the Dungeons and Dragons set, almost all of those little reminder text things, or whatever they're called, ability keywords, because they're not real mechanics, those are all attached to things that are modals, like you make choices about them, or they have little things that trigger mostly when they come into play, and less so when they're on the board. And that's what happened with some of this too, I think, is the real difference is not just the number of keywords, it's that they changed their philosophy away from things that tap to do things being in play quite as much to things that happen when they come into play, so you don't have to track them in the future. And that kind of helped reduce the complexity as well. So I still think even a set like that, even though it looks like it has a lot of words, and like we've said, there's been all these analyses of like Magic sets now have way more words per set than they used to, and all of those kind of things. It's all true. And maybe we're returning to another era of like too much complexity right now, maybe. But I think that this was the first time that they really stepped back and said, oh, we have to like fix this. We have to rethink about this. We have to make the game more simple.
Yeah, and Rosewater talks about this often when he's just like, look, like, you have to have some perspective, and that no matter how engaged you are and how much in the weeds you can get with these cards and grok it, there's always plenty of new players who are coming in. And we are continually thinking about their experiences and their ability to understand something. And I think it's a really high wire act that they have to do every time they do a set like that. Like you said, Stan, where it's like, yeah, we can really lean into this D&D concept, but are people going to get it? Like, are people going to engage with it in the way that we want? And I mean, I don't envy that task that they have. And they certainly, well, I look back on it and I'm like, yeah, what a great idea. There was plenty of people in the time of Time Spiral that were like, this sucks.
But let's go on to something that maybe sucked a little less.
Alara block, 2008
Certainly
to 2009.
Certainly another time that standard is infamous during this era. Now, so we're skipping over Lorwyn a little bit, which again had a bunch of stuff that was banned in Modern when it started, like Bitter Blossom was banned out of Lorwyn. Lorwyn was extremely infamous because of fairies dominating Modern, and also to an extent Fairies was very good in Extended, if I remember, and so that's part of the reason that some of these cards were banned when Modern started, was because of Extended. Anyway, Shards. I also think we don't have to talk about this for too long, but I do want to note that Alara block was really when I came back to Magic Online randomly.
Oh, so it's the best set ever.
Even at the time, I didn't think it was a great set, but it was the first one that kind of took the Ravnica idea and moved it to shards, 3-color combinations instead of 2-color combinations. So they were like, we're going to do a top-down thematic set about what the 3-color combinations of Magic are, and those are the things that are by each other, right? The 3 that are by each other, like Esper and Jund and Naya and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
I started playing this in the second set, which was Conflux, was where I started drafting. And, you know, I mean, the main thing that I wanted to mention about this as far as Modern goes is Cascade. There are a lot of cards in this block, but Cascade, I think at this point, is the most infamous part of Modern, because there are at least 3 competitive decks that look to break Cascade right now, and there's always somebody trying to figure out how to break Cascade through one way or another. I saw somebody on Twitter the other day say, when are we going to talk about how Violent Outburst is one of the biggest design fails ever in Magic? And I do agree a little bit, because it's so used not for what it's for, what the text outwardly says it's for, which I think is a problem, like a player like resonance problem. But you know, the decks are good and you guys love them, so what do you think about that?
Okay, I disagree with the premise. I love attacking for
Perfect.
5 thanks to Violent Outburst at instant speed. I would almost say that, like, Alara, we're going to talk about some of the other impactful cards, or just at least mention them, but Alara introducing Cascade isn't what makes Cascade good. It's they keep printing cards that are meant to be cascaded into.
Well, but remember, at least one of the Cascade cards is before Alara, right? Because Living End is in the previous block. And yeah, the later ones, then I think they realized, oh, this could be a mechanic we could use. And then that's where Rhinos comes into the story much later on.
Here's the other bit that's interesting to me when I was looking into this. Cascade was introduced in the final set of Alara block.
Yeah.
All right. This was big, small, small. The first 2 sets also introduced Aethersworn Canonist, which saw play once upon a time. Ranger of Eos, Fate Stitcher, Ad Nauseum, Elvish Visionary, Wild Nicodle, once banned. A Johnny Vengeant, once a control finisher.
Once a $45 card.
Oh my gosh.
Relic of Progenitus, Celestial Purge, Path to Exile, Noble Hierarch, Knight of the Reliquary. Ardent Pleas when it is in the final set, but that final set also introduced Architects of Will, Bloodbraid, Violent Outburst, Kasali Pride Mage, Maelstrom Pulse, and Thopter Foundry.
Big block. Good cards.
But that's enough for Alara block. It was important, but we also need to move on to other things. Other things that I personally think made a huge impression on Magic, and that would be Magic 2010.
Really?
Which was in 2009.
I love when they do that. It's like a new model of a car.
It's something that hasn't stopped to this day. They're still doing it. It's one year off.
You're right, they
Look,
are.
Here's the thing about Magic 2010. It was actually
I know where this is
super
going.
transformative to the rules of Magic, and at least one other thing that we talked about a little bit earlier. So Magic had been in a bit of a fallow period again, is my understanding at this point. Like most of this era of Magic is a little bit of Magic either stagnant or on a bit of a downswing, right? And that goes all the way back to Mirrodin. Honestly, so when you think about like 5 or 6 years of Magic sort of treading water, people are starting to get interested again, but maybe not hooking as much. Standard is kind of infamously bad with things like fairies, things like Jund during the Alara era, that it's a little bit kind of sketchy.
Does this happen anymore? Do we have fallow periods? Do we have times of like disengagement? Because I feel like, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but they just sort of figured out ways that Magic is always being engaged with because of the ways that they design cards and sets and support Commander. And
I mean,
things
I would
like
say
that.
that Standard's in a rough period right now and has been for years.
Yeah, but like, is the game? Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like they just figured out a way to make the rest of the game
drive it.
something that's not just Standard.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
We can talk about that later. I don't know if that's sustainable necessarily, but it seems to be working right now for what it's worth.
Sure.
But
Okay, tell us
But
about
Magic
Magic
2010 is
2010.
super important for a couple of reasons. One is this is again when I was paying attention to the game more after having dipping my toes back in Alara, opening my first booster boxes again during 2010, and then the next block is when I really started playing a lot after that. But one of the things that made me the most excited about this block is that they reformed the rules in a way that was bigger than they had since 1999. So in 10 years since 6th edition, they made a bunch of things that I think are really significant changes to Magic, to the way that Magic was played, to the way the language of Magic worked. One of them is that, so just so you know, in 1999 when 6th edition was introduced, that's when the stack was introduced. That's when interrupts and mana source cards were removed and replaced by instants. That's when the rule that said that tapped mono artifacts had no text on them was removed. You take a look at Winter Orb to see what I'm talking about with that if you want to see the errata. But those were huge changes to Magic in 1999, just so people understand. The stack in particular was giant and made it a lot easier to understand. But there was one problem with the stack that I always had, and that's with a concept that was removed in 2010, and that is with damage going on the stack being removed as a concept from the rules.
Yes, that's the thing. Like I wasn't around during this, but I remember this is one of the biggest changes that you've heard the most about, right? We're just like, man, no damage is not on the stack anymore, so you can't do what is like Mog Fanatic or whatever. Like you can't like block and then sack and ping things.
Yes, so that's the easiest example. But the way that I want to talk about this really quickly is there was only one way to play cards with sacrifice and tap abilities or combat relevant abilities right. And that was to get them into combat, to put damage on the stack, and then use whatever ability you had, whatever trick you had, whatever you were going to do, unsummon, remove your creature from combat after damage was on the stack to save it. Those were all but have it deal its damage to the opponent's creature then.
Oh,
so
that ain't
these
right.
are all these things that felt really counterintuitive, I think, to me personally, even though I had played Magic for a long time, and I think to new players, because it felt like rules lawyering, because it was like sort of thematically counterintuitive to the way it felt like the game should work, right? For me, from a decision-making perspective, the problem I had with this was that there was only one way to use your cards correctly. And once you learned that, once you were rules lawyered a couple of times, what you did was you were like a rules lawyer vampire. You went out there and exploited players who understood the rules less than you over and over again until they became rules lawyer vampires too. And then it kind of spread like that. And so it makes this environment where A, I think it feels bad, but also B, it's strategically less rich than where we are right now. Even though the rules are simpler, and a lot of people complained at the time of Magic being dumbed down, quote unquote, I actually think that having to make a decision between sticking in there with your Mog Fanatic and using it in combat, or sacrificing it to do the damage instead, or attacking in with it, having it block, and then sacrificing it to do some other interesting thing, but losing that damage, it's a much more strategically rich moment that I think is way more skill testing than what used to be there, where there was really only one clearly dominant strategy when you were using cards like this. That made a huge difference in the game, and actually to me coming back to the game as someone who kind of didn't like damage on the stack, and that happened around the time I stopped playing Magic, for them to come back and remove that around the time that I restarted as well was very interesting, and felt like, okay, they are investing in trying to make Magic a better game still by looking at the rules and being willing to change things. And I thought that was really cool. And there were other things here that happened as well. They called the in-play zone, they renamed it the battlefield. So things used to say comes into play. They don't say that anymore. They all say enters the battlefield. They were trying to make the game more like storytelling resonant in the rules language as well, which is a big like design thing for me, at least, thinking about like, well, how do we get every touch point within the game to feel like it's part of the story and also be clear to people when they're playing. Like that was huge for me as well. The other thing about M10 is that this is the first core set that introduced new cards to it.
Oh yeah, so they were like, hey, this isn't just a reprint set. We can also we can M20 this up.
Yep, and that's where it was.
Does that also mean it's the first core set that was black border?
I think yes. No. I believe that 9th edition was black border, but 10th edition was also black border.
9th is black border.
Yeah.
No, is that true?
Oh no, I think
yes. No, it's not. No, 9th is not, because that's why I have Russian 9th edition, because they were the first printing in Russian.
Well, keep in mind the foils in some of these sets were black border, which is sort of some of what I'm remembering too, which is like even more confusing. But I think you're right, Stan. I think M10 was the first black border one. I'm going to check 10th edition really quick. But yeah. Anyway, these are huge changes to the game in my mind that I think made things a lot better and made Modern better as a result.
Some of these new cards that you're alluding to were quite important as well. This is how we got Baneslayer Angel and Silence and Doomblade and Burning Inquiry, Elvish Archdruid, and the allied checklands. So Rootbound Crag and Glacial Fortress.
Yes.
The reprints also very critical because some of the reprints that appeared in M10 essentially introduced cards into what would then become Modern for the first time. So if it weren't for M10, we wouldn't have Lightning Bolt in Modern because this was the first time it appeared in the Modern era, as well as like Time Warp and Duress.
Yeah, this is I remember that Bolt got reprinted into a standard set at some point. And besides being in M10 and M11, it was never reprinted in a standard again. So thank you, old corsets.
Yeah, I don't think we should be surprised about that, given what happened to those standard. Like Lightning Bolt was super important in those standard environments, in particular in Jund. And then later on, I think people they don't even want Lightning Bolt in Pioneer. So like it's never going to be in standard again. It's too powerful.
That's until Wizards lets us vote on their Threads account on what's going to be in Pioneer Horizons.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some just cool stuff. Zendikar, World Wake, Rise of the Eldrazi, 2009-2010. Zendikar, the Land of Lands. And this block added the enemy fetch lands.
Yep.
Gave us our first full art basic lands in a standard set. Introduced us to Nissa. Introduced us to Landfall. Dual colored creature lands. And of course, some Eldrazi's. I mean, what would early Modern have been like without the concept of fetch shock? Do you know what I mean? This gave us the fetches in early Modern. Ravnica gave us the shocks of early Modern. I just don't know what it'd be like. I guess it'd be like Pioneer, just be like slightly worse, dramatically worse. Yeah. I don't know. We can't even. I mean, there's no reason to keep going down that line. But this is what gave us the fetches.
Yeah, I believe that existed already in Extended, depending on what era of Extended you were playing in. But
like from Onslaught, or you mean from Zendikar? Yes. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
All right. So this was a popular set. I think people liked it. There's a boatload of cards because it's heavily land focused. It just had some powerful printings. We had all of our lands like Valakut, the enemy fetches, the Bajuka Bogs, things like that.
I think one thing that also aided to the set's popularity was that it had a very important bonus sheet that people don't remember that well, but it actually still keeps giving us hints. Someone at PT Barcelona a month or two ago cracked open a pack from OG Zendikar, and it had a revised Plateau.
Oh my
gosh. That's what they did. They put some old
I forgot about that.
Original Dewlands into these packs.
They did more than that. There was a Candelabra. There was Candelabra of Tawnos. I think there was a Black Lotus in packs.
I thought it was no reserve list, but did they have like one Lotus or something?
Well, they didn't reprint these cards. They went and bought cards and put them into the packs. So they weren't printed. They were just cards that they got. So it wasn't really a bonus sheet, Stan. And it was also my understanding, it was only in the first couple of print runs that they did this. And the other thing is they didn't advertise it. They didn't really tell anybody. They just had some kind of Grand Prix or some kind of pre-release at the time where people were just opening these cards. And it was just like, oh yeah, somebody opened the mocks in our thing.
That's
there wasn't any note for like what they were. It's kind of like what they did with Legends later with Dominaria, right?
Oh,
Where
yeah.
they're like, we're gonna put Legends cards in the packs. Anyway, but yeah, that was a fun thing that happened at the same time. And it was kind of like all of these things because this is, like I said, when I started paying attention to the game a bit more again, I was like, this is amazing. Like, and it's all this kind of like social media marketing type stuff that started with some of these tactics that's kind of happening here as well.
That sounds cool. Yeah, but I mean, here's this hit list of like some key cards. And you can imagine like, because it's land focused and landfall is land based, it's kind of universal, like a lot of things that we can use for a while. So like we get stuff like Archive Trap and Hedron Crab and Spreading Seas, Spell Pierce, Goblin Guide, Bloodghast, Pyromancer Ascension, a huge piece to early Storm decks. We have Jace the Mind Sculptor, Searing Blaze, Explorer, Nature's Claim, Amulet.
Jace the Mind Sculptor, probably the first card that was $100 in standard. It was a standard card. It was $100 a pop.
Wowie.
Yeah.
The now banned Eye of Ugin, Stoneforge Mystic, Inquisition of Kozilek. This is where we get Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, a premier finisher for a decade plus later.
Yeah, I mean, this is also where Kozilek and Ulamog were, of course, the original ones.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ancient Stirrings, Splinter Twin, if you've heard of that little card. Yeah. So there's a lot of cool stuff.
Death Shadow.
Death Shadow. Yes, thank you. I forgot about that one. Arbor Elf. You also mentioned, Stan, in the notes. This is kind of where I remember maybe noticing Magic again. Like, I remember seeing Zendikar. I don't know if I remember seeing it when it was new or if it was 2011 or something like that. Like, I saw old packs, but I remember taking notice of Magic once again, kind of in this era.
And this is when I started drafting a lot on Magic Online. I drafted enough that I think I had most of a set of fetch lands on Magic Online, even though I didn't play Constructed. All good stuff, though. I mean, it was hugely important. And this was a set that was a success. I think this is one of the ones where later it became that Zendikar was the highest selling Magic set of all time at the time, I believe.
As we look at Zendikar and some of the blocks that follow it immediately, I feel like we're entering a golden era of design in terms of the impact of the sets, the approach to designing the sets, and just adding so many cool cards to standard and now modern. And it's hard to imagine what this period of 2010 to 2012 or so, without it, I just feel like modern would be so less interesting.
There's just so many cards that are banned from this era too now, but also there's a lot of ones that are still staples as well, or cards that were banned and then were unbanned, like Valakut, for example.
So after the Zendikar block and Rise of Eldrazi, later in 2010, we got Scars of Mirrodin.
So we went back to Broken Plane, and we got more broken stuff.
Though not the way we thought it was going to be broken, I will note. But let's talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, so this set introduced Phyrexian mana.
Well, only the last one did. Only New Phyrexia did. So it was only one small set that had Phyrexian mana in it. But boy,
That's all it took.
Boy, yeah, that was all it took. Exactly.
Yeah, but what else did it have? Mox Opal, Green Sun Zenith, some of our important Infect cards, including Glistener Elf and Blighted Agent, Inkmoth Nexus, Karn Liberated, Hello, Karn Father, Birthing Pod, Git Probe, Dismember, Surgical Extraction. So many dive down episodes made possible thanks to this block. Deceiver Exarch, nice new payoff for Splinter Twin.
Yeah, I mean, this set, as we've talked about, it's a lot of these individual cards are important, but it really is, as far as stuff that impacted or impacts modern still, it's the Phyrexian mana concept that we hadn't really had quite before, because we had pitch cards as a way to pay for cards without mana, and this is introducing using life as a way to pay for cards without mana. And guess what? It's really broken when you use life as a resource in that direct way. And so some of the cards make no difference, like Norn's Annex is a card that has Phyrexian mana in the casting cost and doesn't really do much. But then a card like Git Probe that draws you a card and lets you look at your opponent's hand and draw for 2 life, the low cost of 2 life, and gets you a spell trigger. That turns out to be broken from being played too much. So it was a fine line between all these. And then, of course, Mox Opal, just turns out that we can't have Moxes in Modern except for ones that are really hard to play, like Mox Amber. But, Mox Opal and Chrome Mox, 2 Moxes from Mirrodin, both gone at this point.
Yeah. I mean, again, I was not playing during this, but we see the long-term impact of design decisions that are pretty aggressive. You know what I mean? So I'm happy that, one thing I'm really happy about is that Dismember ever existed, because I feel like it's definitely provided a safety valve for the format at certain times. And I think that's a truly important card. And along with Surgical Extraction, it's no longer, I think, the force that it once was and maybe should never have been. But it's definitely cards like that are much like artifacts, right? Where it's it could be something that gives people just tools that are very important for the long-term safety of the format, along with like really powerful enablers. Like Inkmoth Nexus is still a card that you have to be aware of and can build around and use to very good effect. 12 years later?
Yeah. I mean, surgical extraction and dismember in particular become more important as the format gets more efficient, right? So modern is in a whole different era of efficiency than it was at this point in time, or well, at this point in time, modern didn't even exist quite yet. It's going to exist in a moment. But the idea that having a 1/0 mana card that can disrupt somebody's game plan that's too all in on the graveyard in certain cases is a nice thing to have around. I think you're right, Shane. But this is the moment when modern becomes sort of announced.
And then we finally got to the actual beginnings of modern.
Yes. So all the sets before this were things that were made before modern existed. And right now we're going to get into Pro Tour Philly and the set that came out right after Pro Tour Philly, which is Innistrad. But Shane, did you have any thoughts about Pro Tour Philly before we get there?
No, I don't have any thoughts. I mean, besides it was famously broken. It was famously powerful. It really kind of showed, I think, what a collection of very good players can do, given the first set, I think, that's like as big as modern was at the time, right? Where it's like, hey, you can do stuff with 8 years of cards, do something wild, and they did. And I think then the response was like, WotC's like, well, we have to ban a lot of stuff. And I'm curious how it impacted the development of their sets, I guess, 2 years down the line after that, right? And I guess we kind of find that out.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation, Shane, that I hadn't connected, of like the impact of PT Philly then waterfalling into an entire design philosophy that they have to, I think, to some extent, have to consider, like, what's it going to do to modern, even if they're not designing directly for it.
Can I just read you guys the top 8 of Pro Tour Philadelphia really quickly, 2011?
Yeah, I remember, I think 5 of the decks.
Okay, it's Splinter Twin by Samuel Estradi, which is a Deceiver Exarch Splinter Twin list. It looks a lot like what we would expect if Splinter Twin existed at that point in time. Counter Cat from Josh Utter Layton, which is Noble Hierarch, Tarmogoyf, Wildnicottle. It looks it's sort of a Bant-esque deck, but it's got a bunch of different cards. It's got Bant Charm, it's got Lightning Helix, so it's sort of like a 4-color pile deck. You have Sam Black on Mono Blue Infect. This is the infamous Blazing Shoal pitched Progenitus to be able to make my Inkmoth Nexus or my Blighted Agent hit you for 10 Infect, or also pitch Dragonstorm to Blazing Shoal to do that. Mono Red Affinity, which is what you would expect from one of the proto affinity lists. It's Mox Opal, Cranial Plating, Ornithopter and Memnite, etc., etc., etc. Breach Post. So this is 4 Cloud Post, 4 Glimmer Post, because Glimmer Post had been printed in Scars of Mirrodin. So we had 8 posts in Modern at the time. It hardcast Emeralds. It did all kinds of bad stuff. It also had Primeval Titan in it. So it was just kind of like making a massive ramp spells. Pyromancer's Ascension. There's 2 decks here listed by under Pyromancer Ascension, which is just Storm, by the way, and then another Splinter Twin from Alessandro Portato.
I got 5 words for you, David. That's a lot of cantrips.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't count how many preordains there are, but there's
a lot of these decks just started with 4 Ponder, 4 Preordain. Like, that was where they built from.
Yeah, it's totally true. I believe it's 5 of them have 4 Ponder, 4 Preordain to start. It could be 4. But anyway, this is just high level. So yeah, a lot of cards that were banned after this.
So what happened after that?
Innistrad.
Ooh.
Innistrad block was what came out in 2011. Shane, do you remember this is probably the first time you played Magic?
Yes, I do remember this. I remember this precisely. Yeah. I remember coming over to your house and you being like, hey, I got this box of Innis Magic cards. Do you want to play, like, we can do some, like, this thing called Sealed, right? And I was like, okay, sure, let's do this. And I'm sure I had no idea what I was doing.
Huge set. People love this set. Liliana of the Veil. This doesn't have quite as much, like, it does have one broken mechanic, I guess, in the sense that it brought flashback to modern in a big way, but it's got Liliana, it's got Snapcaster Mage, Stony Silence, Geist of Saint Traft, Champion of the Parish, Unburial Rites, Enemy Check Lands. At this point, I feel like the individual cards are a little less powerful than they used to be, but still, Snapcaster Mage and Liliana the Veil forever were known as like powerful pillars of Modern and still exist in people's brain space as powerful pillars. I think even though they're not as good in the format anymore as they used to be by even a long shot. For me, this was a defining moment in Magic because I was getting deeper into it, but also this is the first time that we had double face cards, which was kind of like a mind-blowing thing at the time. And then the other thing is that this was the first set that I remember that had really strong top-down design. I suppose that Kamigawa was supposed to have top-down design too, but maybe this pulled it off in a way that people felt like was more resonant and also maybe more like of the time, because they had sort of timed this to align with the big vampire craze of things like
Twilight.
What am I thinking of? Twilight. Yeah, they had sort of aligned the set with the cultural zeitgeist in the right way to make people go, ooh, Magic did a horror set. Let's do it.
This is like the set everyone's sad they missed, right? Like if they weren't playing Magic, everyone's like, oh, I heard how amazing the limited format was. And then if you play Modern, you're like, oh man, I could have like gotten my Lilianas and Snapcaster Mages like in the standard set. Like, oh wow, like I could have been doing like the Unburial Rightsing type stuff, or playing with Geist back when Geist was good, or drafting Spider Spawning or something like that. And I think this is the thing that they clearly want to go back to this well a lot. They've gone back to Innistrad twice more since then.
Yeah, and they're planning to one more time, even I think on top of that. Am I right? Or
I think it's a
not.
new horror set that they announced, like a new horror environment, I believe.
Okay,
it's a haunted house.
Good idea. Yes, because I mean, I think
the plane is a haunted house. I think is what the idea is.
The plane is a haunted house. That's so weird.
Because the returns, I think, have not gone to the heights that I think we were at least kind of told about in this old Innistrad set.
I certainly think that the returns to Innistrad have been less successful than the returns to Ravnica, for what it's worth in thematically, but that's another story. Anyway, this set was powerful. Stan nicely pointed out in a later note here in the notes that there were way more cards that weren't mentioned. There was Lingering Souls, Thalia, Thoughtscour, Geralt's Messenger, Undying Evil, Faithless Looting is in this set, Strangleroot Geist, Young Wolf, Huntmaster of the Fells. I mean, there's just an incredible amount of cards in this set, really, when you think about Miracle cards, Restoration Angel. A lot of these don't get as much play as they used to, but there are still broken payoffs like Grizzlebrand, or super important cards like Cavern of Souls that came from this set. Again, none of these are super duper connected to set mechanics in a way that some of these other sets are, but these are very good cards. I guess Flashback and Undying are probably the two main ones to note. So RTR block is next. That's 2012, 2013. This is the first time that Magic really returned to one of their standalone planes. And I think that this led to a precedent of them saying, hey, we're going to reuse a bunch of stuff going from now on.
What about Scars of Mirrodin?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I totally forgot about Mirrodin. Mirrodin was the first time. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So I think this just continued the trend of saying, hey, we're gonna start reusing planes that we've put work into doing the world building. We can do another set there and make it interesting and make it cool.
What about 20 years of nonstop Dominaria?
Yeah.
Well, that's nonstop. They didn't go to other places until after that ended, kind of. Other than Olgotha or whatever for Homelands.
So,
yeah, okay.
Dave, were you playing? You were playing during RTR then, right?
Yeah, RTR would be kind of like when I was getting pretty deep into drafting. It's also the first time I went to a Grand Prix since the first time I was doing these. So I went to Grand Prix Chicago, which was Modern, by the way, Grand Prix 2012 in November. I only played drafts. I played side drafts. I went with a bunch of people that I knew from one guy that was in Cleveland, who I used to play with at my store when I was growing up. And I went with his friends. They stayed at my apartment and stuff like that. But I went and did side drafts while they played in the main event.
What was the player base's reception to going back to Ravnica? Were they like, sweet, we love, old Ravnica. I either wasn't playing, or I heard how good it was, or I really loved it when it was out type thing. Like, were people do you think is equally receptive to the concept?
Yeah, I think people were really excited about it at the time. They were like, it makes sense.
Sweet. Yeah, it was like 6 years after the original, so it felt like a good amount of time. I think had passed.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big thing for me here was just we reprinted Shocklands and Deathrite Shaman is in this set. Those are probably the most important things from it. And, Deathrite Shaman was legal for only 18 months in Modern before it was banned. And then it was banned, of course, in Legacy as well. Legal in Pioneer because they don't have fetch lands. But it was a key part of dominating decks within there and just, it completely dominated. It made Jund a whole thing. Jund was the deck that actually won Grand Prix Chicago in 2012. I think Joshua Layton won it with a lingering Jund, like Jund with lingering souls, which if you want to think about like a memory hole that we could go down that doesn't, there's no chance of that type of deck doing anything right now, but
value, baby.
It is what it is.
I think there's one other card from this block that is very important, and that's called Supreme Verdict. Though there are plenty of other playables too. Like we get Rest in Peace here, we get Abrupt Decay and Dreadbore and Boros Charm, Voice of Resurgence, Wear and Tear, Burning Tree Emissary. Like a lot of good cards, but I think in the same way that Shockland reprint was helpful, in the same way that Deathrite sort of like open Jund, Supreme Verdict to this day just remains like the best Wrath that we have.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Wraths aren't as important, but it was super important for a long time in Modern, and it's still important in Pioneer, for example. Stan, you have a note here about how you feel like this starts to see a little bit of a shift in design philosophy. What do you think you feel like changes as you look at the cards from this set?
Yeah, I feel like even if we look at some of these most impactful cards, the list starts to shrink a little bit, and I'm starting to pick up on a little bit of a vibe of power level being downshifted, rare lands, very desirable rare lands, maybe carrying a little more weight in terms of attracting players and more importantly, buyers. And maybe we're starting to see this transition of we don't necessarily need to put higher power level into standard sets because it is impacting Modern now, which is becoming a premier format for the game. And this, to some extent, this with a reprint set that's going to come shortly thereafter is starting to give shape to a product philosophy that I think we see to this day.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we should move on to that set because I think it is important to think about. Modern Masters 1 came out in 2013.
Okay, I want to ask a question of you, Dave, because I know you're more engaged than any of us at this point. And what was Modern's level of popularity? Like Stan called it, one of their premier formats, but I don't really know, like, were people still primarily playing like standard or other formats, and then like they'd go into Modern was like a super enthusiast thing because of like what the budgetary restrictions of it or the card availability? Like, where are we when MM1 comes out?
I think it's more the latter. I mean, MM1 is what led me to start really think about building a Modern deck. So I'd been paying attention to it before. I knew that my acquaintances that I had been talking about Magic, because I didn't have a lot of Magic friends in Chicago at this point. So I was talking to people who I had used to play Magic with back in Cleveland. It was right around Return to Ravnica that I was like, or Modern Masters 1, that I was like, okay, I'm going to find an LGS that I like, and I'm going to start hanging out there and try to meet some people. And that's how I met like a lot of the people that introduced us, like the people that introduced us to Stan, basically Scott, Kane, and kind of that whole group of people that hung out at Brainstorm, RIP Brainstorm. So I would say that it was something that people were interested in, but I don't know if people really saw it as part of their identity. Mm-hmm. Grand Prix Chicago, I think, had a typical attendance for a Grand Prix at that time, which was over 1,000 people in the main event. That was normal for main events then, between 1,000 and 1,500. I could double check what it was, but it felt like, hey, it was like unattended and enjoyed.
And look, the reason I call it a premier format is because they're having GPs. They're having PTs and GPs. And
oh yeah. I'm not doubting the take at all. No, I'm just saying, like, even if they have that, I'm curious, like, what the engagement with that was. You know what I mean? Like,
but I don't think we're anywhere near the point where what happens maybe 3 or 4 years later, where it's the most watched format. It's the most, Grand Prix that are modern have twice the number of people watching it as or like Star City Games events that are modern have more people viewing it than Star City Games events that are standard. I'm pretty sure that standard is still like leading the way at this point. And this is an interesting, if kind of boring era of standard, where you go from Innistrad to Return to Ravnica block to Theros block, and you get the like, this is Mono Black Devotion. This is like all of these things that I think were pretty popular times in standard, even if people, at the top end, people were sort of annoyed with the way the format actually worked. But as Stan mentioned, there wasn't this incoming philosophy in modern that was like, hey, if we make some of the older cards that have gotten really expensive more available, maybe more people will play modern. And also, it's a revenue stream for Wizards as well to unlock some of that reprint equity, as Seth from MTG Goldfish and so many other people have talked about. But this is the first all reprint non-standard set that Wizards had not ever did, but had done in a long time. Okay, so they had done. The problem with reprint sets with Magic is that a long time ago they had done a set called Chronicles that I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, that had totally tanked the market. They had gotten sued over it. A lot of it had to do with where the reserve list came from, because printing these things in white border had tanked the value of some of the cards in Legends, for example, that were bad cards but were valuable because they were scarce. So this was all tied up in where the reserve list really comes from originally. And so this is one of the first times that Wizards said, okay, we did the reserve list. We're now beyond the reserve list. The end of what we said the reserve list was going to stop. Now we have this equity built up of these cards that we can reprint, and there are a bunch of cards that are valuable that people want. We're going to do a set based on that. And this was also the first time that I remember that they mess around with a premium MSRP, which was, I'd like to tell you what that premium MSRP was of Modern Masters 1. Anybody want to know how much the MSRP was?
Yeah,
$6.99.
I was gonna get $7. Yeah,
we got there.
Yeah, $6.99 a set. Packs were $3.99 at the time, and I remember people being like, "Oh my God, $6.99 a pack for sets." You guys have no idea what's coming. 2013, Dave, no idea what's coming.
Well, back then, a can of Coke was like a nickel.
In 2013,
I said, "Give me 5 Bs for a quarter." No, Dave. I remember. Do you remember this, Dave? Just in terms of some price context too. So I started playing again like a year and a half after Modern Masters 1 came out, and we went to a store. I forget the name of it. And
Hot Sauce.
He went to Hot Sauce. Was it Hot Sauce? Yeah, the one in Chicago. And I remember seeing on the wall, I was like, what is that? Why are these packs $20? And you were like, oh yeah, these are like really cool reprint things, and they sold out, and they didn't print a bunch of them, so they got really expensive. And I think I think it was around your birthday, and so I bought you a pack for your birthday. And you opened doubling season. That was my first engagement with super premium packs in Magic.
There you go. Guess what? I opened a doubling season in Wilds of Eldraine the other day too.
Oh man, full circle.
Weirdly, full circle. But anyway, yeah. So this is them printing. They're not printing things directly into the older formats quite yet, although Commander predates Modern Masters by a little bit. So the first Commander decks that added cards to Legacy were a couple of months before Modern Masters. So that was vaguely starting, but it wasn't something they were doing on purpose, I think, at that point in time. They were just like, we want to make these Commander cards playable somewhere other than Commander so they can be played in Legacy. And then they went, wait, they can also define the format, but that's a whole other podcast too. At the time that Modern Masters 1 came out, Tarmogoyf, which was the key card of the set, was $100 to $110 on Goldfish, and it went up because I think that this set ended up making Modern more popular. And by the time that Modern Masters 2 came out, they were like $200 a piece.
Yeah, this was like the increased supply increases interest, but the supply was nowhere near enough because it was the first time they'd done something like that. So like Modern Masters 1, like I said, like, just a year later was like $20 packs, like almost 3x, you know what I mean?
Right. So we don't have to talk about it forever, but now that we're in reprint land, basically, and how to figure out how to manage the back catalog of cards that are worth money that Magic has, this is one of the first sets that really did that. This in combination with Commander Precon products, I think that these are the two like beginnings of that whole philosophy of Magic, that whole revenue stream of Magic that people love or hate or get annoyed with, or I don't even know half the time. But, it's certainly something that we'll think about now.
So now we get to the best part of the show, because I'm playing Magic. I think Stan's playing Magic.
Shane has entered the picture.
It's me, your friend Shane. So Khans of Tarkir, Fate Reforged, Dragons of Tarkir. September 2014 till early 2015, the Khans block, and specifically Khans of Tarkir, was just like this incredibly popular time for Magic, at least in my eyes and my memory, and the sales numbers that I remember being quoted a lot. Like, people were really engaged with Magic during cons, and including me. Like the thing that happened, Dave will remember this well, I'm sure, because I think I was like, hey, we've played a little bit of Magic, Dave. People I know are talking about Magic. The game seems like it's getting more popular. And I was like, Dave, I think I want to get into Magic.
Do you remember where we were when that happened?
No, in my brain, it's your house, but...
I believe that we were out in front of Emporium in Logan Square at like 1:30 in the morning. And we were out with everybody, our friends, and you and I had like a moment outside. I'm not going to say why.
Confided in you.
And we were talking about that, and you were like, yeah, I think I want to get into Magic. And I was like, I can make this happen for you. But Stan, I only bring it up because Stan,
we can make this happen.
You and I were played some at Emporium, I believe, right? The last time you were in town.
Yeah. Emporium is important to dive down lore. I don't think it was open at this point though yet. Like, I don't think the Emporium brand existed.
I don't think so either. I'm gonna have to check.
It's probably like Kohl's or like the Owl.
Yeah, you guys were at Gaslight. That's what it was. You went to the Gaslight Cafe
in the middle of the night.
Let's just talk about all of our favorite Milwaukee Boulevard spots.
Eater Chicago, July 21st, 2014. Look around Emporium, Logan Square, opening tonight. We were there 2 or 3 months after it opened.
You're right.
Had this moment.
Okay, so anyway,
crazy.
Enough about me. So this introduced the 5 3-color clans of Tarkir. So these new like wedges not only gave names to all these like stuff that was called like Rug, Bug, America, Junk, but like, much like Ravnica, gave people like these really identifiable build around deck concepts, like especially in Standard. Like, you could just be like, I'm going to play a Jeskai deck using like these Jeskai cards. I'm going to build around Mardu, like I'm going to use Butcher of the Horde and all these other, and like Crackling Doom, and you're going to try to make a teamer deck out of Savage Knuckleblade and realize it's not that good. But it's another one of those things where it's like, hey, here's some rails for us to guide you. Some of them might not be great. You're going to get Siege Rhino for your Obzon deck, things like that, and here's Jeskai Ascendancy to build around. The world sort of felt like your oyster during cons. And really importantly too, in terms of the financial draw, is cons reprinted the allied fetches from Onslaught. So players could now run even more of these in their modern decks to then fetch up the lands they needed. Cons also introduced things that we still know and love about Magic: Prowess, Delve, and cards like Monastery Swiftspear, which immediately go into burn. We have things like Siege Rhino making the Obzon decks in Modern incredibly popular in early 2015. They have this short window of being really good. 3 of them made the top 8 of PT Fate Reforged, for instance. And I think the impact of the Delve spells too was really huge. I wasn't playing Modern yet, but I remember hearing about sort of the impact of this, like Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise immediately impacted, is it Delver decks and like these Jeskai Ascendancy decks. And so they got banned really quickly out of the format.
I mean, almost every deck wanted to run Treasure Cruise. I mean, Burn was running Treasure Cruise at this time, for what it's worth. So just an aside, but...
For sure. And for me, this is when like I noticed Modern, and like I was like, maybe I should dip my toe in this format. And like for some reason, like I think my first deck that I played, I think it was on Cockatrice, was like Esper Mentor. And like, it's just like removal, permission, hand disruption, and some Monastery Mentor and Snapcaster Mage and stuff like that. And I don't know. Stan, do you remember when you started getting back into Magic and when you started thinking about Modern?
Well, I was getting back into Magic around this time. Nick's block was wrapping up, and the first new set I witnessed and I think like cared enough to like go buy fresh packs was Cons. M15 sort of passed me by, so maybe like M15 was the set that was in stores when I bought that Fateful pre-constructed deck. In fact, thereafter, Fate Reforged was my first time drafting, and then Magic Origins was actually my first pre-release, and we have many fond memories of of those days. I will say, like, I remember the attitude around MTG was very vibrant in this time, just from meeting people at the LGS. Like, it was positive and it was kind of like uplifting. And I think part of that had to do maybe with the fact that Magic hadn't really entered the pop culture mainstream in a way that it has right now. And I don't think that's just like Magic's fault. I think like the popularity of D&D has contributed to Magic's growth, and card games have sort of gone through a boom.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, like, of course, because it's the time that I have the most visibility on, it seems novel to me, and it seems important to me. I'm sure that Magic had plenty of things that were like Cons, but I just remember going. I went to the store multiple times a week. It was always packed. Like, the draft environment always had like 2 pods going, and that's the kind of thing. Like, I don't know if that still happens in the same way, especially like for certain draft formats. I don't think we're firing 2 pods at even my like popular LGS, but I could be completely wrong. I'm sure people have different perspectives than I do, but it definitely felt good in Chicago at the time.
What do you think may have contributed to this like very attractive period around this Cons block? Because from my perspective, like, after not paying attention to Magic the Gathering for more than a decade, and then just kind of like picking it back up on a whim and seeing Cons come out, like, it felt like using Asian mythology and dragons and like martial artists and mysticism was a really fresh, exciting aesthetic that fit into the fantasy, sci-fi, adventure themes of Magic the Gathering, but also felt really novel. And maybe that's because Cons was a new domain or a new plane, and they got to do a lot of new stuff with it. But like, the cards almost have like a certain sheen to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you are waxing more poetic than I would. I don't disagree with what you're saying by any means. I think it's that people like Rails, and people feel comfortable with Rails, and they also like fetch lands.
But whenever I opened a fetch land in a booster pack, I was like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Oh yeah, Dave, what do you probably have more perspective than we do?
Oh, I think it was an all-timer draft set that led into a pretty good standard format that had important staples for later formats, and you could play them pretty powerful decks as a result of the fetch lands. Like, that's where it was at for me. You could play kind of powerful sets in standard, or decks in standard. You could add these powerful things to your decks in modern, and it made that whole format level up in a real way. I also think that Morph is one of the best limited mechanics ever, and so I think that made the set a lot better for people to draft, and so that was just a fun thing for people to do. Also, I think we were just young and didn't have many responsibilities in our brains at that time, and so it's about our own youth when we think about this as well, although I was the young age of 34 at this time. So
that's how old I am now. Yeah, your note about power is interesting, Dave, to me, because we look at some sets that are high power level and them pushing people away. Like, we talked about that with Mirrodin, for instance, or other sets that like caught Worldwake or maybe Zendikar, where it's just like the cards are so powerful they had to be banned, and of course the Delve cards had to be banned in Modern. But Cons demonstrates that there's a way of doing high power that is fun and engaging to people and keeps people coming back for more. And maybe like it has to be a really good limited environment to do so.
I also think that it's worth noting that the fun times of Cons and maybe even Fate Reforged turned into one of the worst standard formats ever later, when there were fetchable duels in the format with it. So when you were just fetching basics, the fetch lands were pretty fun. When the Battle for Zendikar lands showed up, this format got bad, really bad, and really expensive.
So I disagree with the premise. Yes, it was expensive. I think it was one of the most expensive standard sets of all or formats of all time. It wasn't a bad format though. It was really fun.
Yeah.
It was just inaccessible.
Yeah.
I think
for
that
me,
was
I
the
would put
problem.
that as bad. But I think we've spent enough time on cons. I think it's time for us to kind of warp through the last, because as Stan noted earlier, some of the sets start having bigger and smaller impacts on Modern at the same time in a way. So there's 3 bullet points I want to hit really quickly that I think are important from this 2015-ish to 2019 range. One is Oath of the Gatewatch in 2016, which brought one of the most broken Pro Tours ever, which is, still known as Eldrazi Winter. This is your Eye of Ugin, Thought Not Seer, Reality Smasher, Eldrazi Mimic era, where the set came out, then they had a Pro Tour, and there was one Star City Games event that I remember between the set coming out and the Pro Tour, and I was like, wow, people are going to use Heartless Summoning to cast Eldrazi and do all this really cheaty stuff. And no, it turned out to be even worse because they used Eye of Ugin and a bunch of other things to just have colorless decks. That was a nightmare. That led to a bunch of bans, and that's still infamous. This is also the time that they banned Splinter Twin, which is, still a pain point for many people who play Modern at this point in time. Aether Revolt in 2017, I think, is notable just because it brought us one of the best interactive spells that we've had in a long, long, long time. And still kind of defines the format in Fatal Push. We hadn't had any single mana removal that was really great added to the format since Path to Exile, really. So this kind of duality of Path to Exile versus Lightning Bolt as being your 1 mana interaction options, adding 1 in black kind of opened up the format a lot to a couple of different things. In my mind, it's mostly got to do with Grixis Death Shadow and the rise of that deck, but I was looking through deck lists the other day, and Shadow is actually around a little bit before that. Didn't always play at main. Mm-hmm. Still, in my mind, it helped these kind of hyper-efficient decks kind of coalesce around 1 mana removal options. So that's 2017. Guilds of Ravnica, of course, is super important to us because it's when we started the podcast, and it's where Arclight Phoenix was. And so that was a whole thing as well. I do think that this is a little bit of an interesting turning point before we get to the next moment, though.
I mean, I think it's interesting that WotC had such ability to wait 6 years between returning to Ravnica multiple times. Like, we're already going back to Eldraine, 4 years later?
They've said that they're going to do returns more often. Like they're concentrating on building stories around 10 or 12 different worlds, which I think is smart for them, so they don't have to start over every time. But, hopefully it doesn't get too weird with that. We did get a glimpse at some possible futures for Magic Planes with the battles as well. There's all these battles for planes we've never been to, which is sort of like planting seeds about what those places could be about, which could be interesting as well.
Dave, you said that this was a turning point, going back to guilds?
I'd say so. I mean, from my perspective, guilds and really the printing of Phoenix was, I think, when the discourse surrounding Modern got kind of soured and negative, and maybe I'm overlooking the impact of Eldrazi Winter, but it just felt like Phoenix was the first time every set brought with it banned discourse. And perhaps part of that also has to do with the fact of what came immediately after Guilds of Ravnica.
Yeah.
just a banger after banger of crazy OP stuff. But I think maybe people are starting to recognize the format is changing very, very frequently, and standard sets are becoming powerful again and defining Modern in a way that the last few years they just hadn't.
Do you think this was a trickle down too, potentially, of the impact of Kaladesh Standard and things like that, where just the concepts of WotC responding to power level through bans was sort of increasing fairly rapidly?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this is obviously all leading up to us talking about 2019, which lives in infamy because of fire design, right? So there was this kind of pause and huge impact in Modern between 2016 and 2019, or at least there were these moments that it was like, oh, Eldrazi was a huge impact, so we're going to fix that. Oh, there was Fatal Push. That was a good thing, blah, blah, blah. We're going to fix some stuff here and there. But that 3-year period was vaguely stable in Modern in a lot of ways. And then you get to fire design where all of a sudden every set, like Stan was saying, has lots of things that impact Modern and lots of things that impact Pioneer, which, becomes a format not too long after this. Towards the end of 2019, I think, is when they announced Pioneer as a format. And also Standard cards, and they're good across every format. And you're kind of like, oh, I got to play against everything. And this run continues. We're going to stop this episode in 2019 because there's 3 important things that happen in 2019. One is War of the Spark, one is Modern Horizons 1, and the last one is Throne of Eldraine. Obviously, War of the Spark and Throne of Eldraine are all about fire design, really kicking this idea of, wow, we have some kind of like sameness across the formats because the cards are so good in Standard that we have to implement them in multiple formats. And then Modern Horizons is, hey, we're going to print cards directly into Modern so that there is some shakeup in Modern over time, so we don't get these periods where it feels like it's very similar decks kind of being good all the time. But what do we think about the legacy of those two things? 1, cards going directly in. 2, Standard sets being powerful enough to impact Modern all the time.
This is where I get slightly more overtly negative than I have been for the rest of the episode, where it's like it sort of just feels like, hey, we need to print really powerful cards to sell more packs and move the needle. I think this is when I think people started talking more aggressively about WotC stakeholder motivations and things like that, where it's just like, yeah, we need to sell things. And the way we can sell things is by, couching it behind the concept of making good sets and making powerful sets. But I think that, the impact of that had a lot of negativity around it too. And so it's like I get it. It's this, they're in this to sell cards, but I think this is when people sort of became at least more disheartened about the concept of what the balance between a for-profit company and the desires of the player base.
It did, in my memory, contribute to a somewhat exciting period as well, where things were just constantly changing, either through the influx of power or the aftermath of bans, where every 6 months or so they had to do something to clean up their mess. But the post-ban environment and the post-new set environment was always just a totally different format. So on the one hand, you had people lamenting that Modern is rotating, but on the other hand, I think it just made for us Modern diehards at that time. This is when we started the show also. We were so engaged, and it just there's always something new to talk about, something new to strategize around, and just tons of new decks to wrap your head around too, some of which still exist to this day.
Yeah, I think that obviously we're saying that we're stopping in 2019, but if you think about what happened after this, 2020 pandemic, people are playing mostly Magic Online. Theros Beyond Death makes an impact in Modern, and then so does Ikoria, and then it kind of goes on a little bit after that before fire design starts to taper back off, and maybe we're now in an era where Standard sets don't make as much of an impact as Modern as they used to, but we're fully on board with Modern rotation because we have Modern Horizons 2, we got Lord of the Rings that comes into the format. Next year we're going to have Modern Horizons 3. It feels like this is the moment where they kind of said, oh, we don't really want to mess up Standard that much, but we do want to keep Modern engaging. So we're just going to almost treat Modern like it's a different thing than Standard.
Yeah.
And we're going to design cards that fit for it specifically. And we're not necessarily going to put those into Standard. And it is what it is. And there are good things and bad things about that, I think. I mean, the worst thing about it for me is that the cards are pricey. They're pricey in this thing. And they're going with this premium model for the Horizon sets and for the Lord of the Rings sets, and maybe it's just a little too premium, because the really good cards are $75 a piece, like the One Ring or whatever it is right now. And I don't know if we need quite all that. Like, isn't there a way to get it a little bit lower? But, it is what it is, I guess, for the moment.
Yeah, I feel like this is like a bummer of a way to.
Yeah, I don't want to end like this. I
So
still think the
I have a
gameplay is
positive-
good.
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean the gameplay is good, but here's a positive little question for us to chat about as we close this episode. Looking at this history of Modern's various impactful and infamous sets, which set do you guys think did the most good for the format?
The most good. I guess how do we define good? I don't know. Dave, I'm going to let you have this first.
I mean, it's cons, if you think about it that way, just because it balanced out the fetch land imbalance that we had in the format, I think, as far as just making it fair. Now, fetch lands are the key to Modern. They're the best part of it and the worst part of the format. Lots of the abuses come from fetch lands, but the fact is at least everybody has access to all of the pieces now in whatever color combination they want to play, and that is something we didn't really have. We didn't talk about New Capenna. We didn't talk about New Capenna with introducing triomes to it, and
No, you're wrong.
Wait, sorry, Ikoria introducing triomes and then Capenna finishing it. But yeah, that's part of the whole soupiness that can happen. But I do think the fact that the mana is balanced in this format is probably the fairest thing about it at the moment. I don't know.
You realize that we didn't talk about companions at all, by the way, from Ikoria.
Well, that's why I wanted to stop at 2019 because
Yes.
that's why I said Ikoria made an impact. And
Oh yeah, I know.
blah, blah,
It's
blah,
just
blah,
like,
so-
yeah, like we can't be completionists here. Just like I'm just thinking about, man, so many wild cards and cards.
It's also just too fresh, and this was about history.
Yes,
But
exactly.
I think the ones that did the most good, like I think getting all the fetch lands in here is important. I think that other than that, there's some Zendikar got the other fetch lands in, and then it's probably some of the earlier stuff. If you look at like Time Spiral block,
Time
all
Spiral.
of the cool cards that are in there, that's done a lot of interesting stuff for this format. So
I mean, cons is clearly the best because it made me really enjoy Magic, and then think about playing Modern, and then making a Modern podcast called The Dive Down with you all, and we've had a hugely important impact to the format.
Indeed, we did.
How about you, Stan?
Stan, what's your answer? Yeah.
Modern Horizons 2.
Well, I mean, yeah, the most good.
Come on,
okay.
really?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's strong arguments there.
Yeah, I think Modern Horizons 2 was the most effective way of both creating a new identity for the format while cleaning up some of their past messes. And even though we lost a lot of beloved staples, we lost our Lilianas and our Snapcasters and our Burning Tree emissaries. I don't know. Out of that, we also gained like a stability that we haven't had since 2019 or late 2018 for that matter.
I think that's probably true. I mean, I guess closing this on a discussion of Modern Horizons too quickly, I think makes sense. I do still feel bad that there are lots of anecdotal evidence of people saying, well, Modern Horizons 2 priced me out of the game because the cards that I had to get are so expensive from the set. Ragavan, people hate Ragavan. Ragavan's probably my favorite card generally right now to play with, other than, my old favorites like Lightning Bolt. So I think there's a case to be made for what you're saying, Stan, that they had to fix what was broken, and this helped by putting cheap interaction into the format. Lots of cheap interaction into the format.
So cheap, it's free. Practically pays you.
Yeah.
Well, I think we gotta close this one down, y'all. I personally want to thank Will for being such an important financial support for the podcast, just in terms of the Barrister and Man partnerships we have. I know that's helpful for both parties, but also for being just such a long time patron. We're super happy to do this episode, essentially for you. You know what I mean? It was fun for us, but it's great to have you to work with for so long, and we appreciate all of our patrons out there for helping keep us going no matter what tier you're at. But yeah, if you want to be able to do an episode like this, work with us on a topic every 6 months or so, you can go up to the $15 a month. Excuse me, $15 an episode tier. We know it's a lot, but if you have it and you want that privilege and ability, feel free to think about it. This was really fun for me, you guys. Like I had a really good time looking at like this history of Modern through like these wild and creative and sometimes busted sets of the past. And really what it made me feel was like nostalgia for a time I never had. Like I maybe really wish I had gotten into Magic earlier than I did. Like I took 19 years off this game, right? Between like 95 and 2014. So like, I could have been doing a lot more fun than just coming back with cons.
Yeah, 19 years of accomplishing nothing.
Nothing. Literally nothing. Just like thinking about playing in like that different era where like Tarmogoyf's hinting at planeswalkers, or like, the 10 guilds of Ravnica were brand new concepts. I could have like been drafting Innistrad. That just seems like a lot of fun that I could have had, like with less income and more time, I guess.
Shane, but you can draft now.
That's a good
point. Drafts are still fun. You can discover, the wilds of Eldraine and rats. You can rats. You can do rat stuff now, bro.
Rat it up. Any thoughts on this, y'all? On this experiment, Dave? Did it make you think about Magic in a slightly different way, or is it kind of what you remembered?
This one just kind of made me feel old.
We are old, Dave.
Same. This one reminded me of the time that I went on a date to see a girl play in her band at Lincoln Hall, and then I biked to the Dice Dojo at midnight to make the Magic Origins pre-release, because pre-releases used to fire at midnight.
Yeah, it was the worst.
Yeah.
I did one of those ever. Worst idea ever.
Yeah. Well, I was 23 or 24 at the time, so I was able to do crazy stuff like that, and then bike home at 4 a.m. and just dream.
Sleep till noon.
Yeah, basically. Well, that was fun. Thank you again, Will. Thank you guys for doing such thorough research. This was really, really cool to just hear both of your perspectives. Dave walking us through a little bit of your history and your youth. Shane grounding it all together, and
with
Stan
oldness
being the funny one.
Like always.
That wraps up this week's show. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to the podcast or just reach out in general, you can tweet us at thedivedown, all one word, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. Also check out our store at thedivedown.com/store. Head over to heavyplay.com to get some incredible deck and dice boxes and playmats featuring their awesome Equip Mag system. Use promo code THEDIVEDOWN2023 for 10% off your first order at Heavy Play. Also, shout out to Mana Traders for sponsoring the Dive Down. Sign up for Mana Traders using promo code THEDIVEDOWN23, all one word, for 10% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. And also get some amazing shaving soaps, body soaps, fragrances, and more at Barrister and Man using that same promo code, THEDIVEDOWN23. Gets you 15% off your first order from Barrister and Man. And then save some money on paper cards at Nerd Rage Gaming with promo code DIVE8. 8% off all your orders at NRG. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and take a walk down memory lane. Musical guest, the Fly Honeys.